All right, everybody, it's 4:30. Are we ready? All right, I believe we have everyone here for a quorum, so we'll call this meeting to order. Mr. Peace, will you lead us in our invocation?
Yes. That is all about. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be before the board tonight. We ask that you will meet and make decisions that's best to serve the children of this county. We ask that we will continue to do those things that's pleasing in your sight. Lord, we just thank you for all these things that you've given us the opportunity to do, and that's to be servants of the children of this county. These things we ask, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Peace. Ms. Anderson, will you lead us in our pledge?
Yes, shall we all stand, face the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
All right, our first order of business is the approval of meeting minutes. There in your board packet, you see meeting minutes for March 22nd and March 29th. What would be the pleasure of the board?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve. Is that for both sets of minutes, Dr. Houlihan?
That is correct.
All right, and a second by Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Is there any further discussion? All right, seeing none, if you're ready to vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, motion carries. Madam Superintendent, I believe we have a report from you.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and all who are present this evening. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'll make some very brief comments, if you don't mind. We have a two-part agenda this afternoon. This afternoon's purpose was to have our 2021-2022 GCPS financial proposal presented by Mrs. Beth Day. Allow me to publicly thank her and all who contributed to this year's development of the work. It is an excellent document on behalf of many parties, but the large portion of the work was developed by Mrs. Beth Day. We thank you once again for an excellent document, Mrs. Day. Second, we will hear from our winter and spring task forces, and I will speak more to that when we get to that portion of the meeting. Allow me to share that it is time for families to begin signing up for summer learning. Yes, summer learning. Families will be contacted very soon, and we're asking everyone to help us help student learners fill gaps, recover credits, and build skills this summer. Please register if you're contacted. And please be reminded the application window is still open for virtual instruction next school year. This will require a one-year commitment for hiring and resource allocation. We need to know now so that we may make certain students are properly taken care of. Applications will remain open. The application window will remain open until April 30th. This concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. Are there questions for the superintendent today? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our next. My report consists of just one thing today. Dr. Houlihan and myself and the executive staff met with our commissioner liaisons this past Friday. Had a good discussion that morning. We first started with our discussion of redistricting, and they share the same sentiments that we shared at the last meeting. And I believe the two attorneys are beginning to work together to identify a firm that we will use for that redistricting, and had some conversation around what that looked like the previous time and what that needs to look like this time. The second thing is we talked about budget. Obviously, it's budget time. And we reiterated to them that we had one and only one ask, went through the presentation of what you'll have at your seat now, and just had some discussion points around that, shared some sentiments about that, and just the importance of how important that was for us to support the educators and the staff of Granville County Public Schools. We are just like all the other employees across the county that need those benefit increases that are mandated. And so we told them that was the most important priority that we were asking for this year, knowing what kind of budget season we were in. Dr. Houlihan, do you have anything to add from that?
I would add that I think we had a pretty good discussion around budget from other perspective, from another angle. They heard clearly that the money that we need for the personnel needs that we have, I think the idea was that if the budget came through as we have seen, and it certainly is sketchy, that we would still need about $259,000 above what they're talking about giving us. Is that close? And so we had a good conversation about that. There certainly were no promises, but there was also no ain't gonna happen kind of thing. So I thought that was encouraging, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Dr. Houlihan. Any questions surrounding that meeting? All right. We will move to our first topic of discussion tonight. Drum roll for Ms. Beth Day. It's time for your budget proposal work, and so we appreciate, again, I'll echo the superintendent's sentiments. We appreciate all your team has done for this, and look forward to the work tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Thank you, Dr. McLean, board members. I will say this is a culmination of a lot of work that has happened to get to this point this afternoon, to bring this budget proposal for your consideration this afternoon for the 21-22 year. There you have with you on board docs as well as at your seat 2 different documents. One document is the full budget document, and it's the booklet, the bound booklet, and that's also a 60-some page document that is on board docs. And new, hot off the presses, is a 1-page budget summary. This is based on a recommendation from our Board of Education Finance Committee to have a 1-page summary of the budget. And so that is what we will kind of focus on this afternoon and go through. And I would like to say before I begin, one thank you to Terry Howard, that is our printing person in the office that works really hard and has worked really hard on putting this, helping me with preparation of this and putting this together, both the summary as well as the book. And so he's put in a lot of time on this as well. So on the budget proposal executive summary, I just remind you that Granville County Schools' budget consists of a lot of different funding sources, state, federal, local funds. And as we look at this summary, we're kind of on a microscope down on our county funding, that we're focusing on that. So I just remind you of that. But so because the purpose of this is the proposal and the request to the county. So we are focusing on that county funding. The top half of this summary, this 1-page document, includes our county operating funds. And as has already been stated tonight, and you've heard before, this budget proposal is based on the fact that we would be asking for our additional salary and benefit increases. So that is the only ask that is included in our operating funds. And the total of that ask is our cost is $584,115. But as you recall from the presentation, any funds we receive for operating funds requires a pass-through to the charter schools. And so our ask would need to be $758,591 to take care of our needs of the 584 and also include that pass-through to the charter schools. A couple of things to note on that. This is the cost of doing business. This is nothing new for our district. It's just our additional projected cost for 21-22. We cannot use the federal emergency funds for this particular purpose. And this is something that we will need year after year. So that is the additional ask. You can see that worked into the total budget. That pie chart includes what our total local funds would be, the funds we received in the prior year from the county, plus that additional ask. The total is $17,392,080, and that breaks out with Granville County Schools portion of $13.2 million, and the pass-through to the charter schools estimated at $4.1 million for 21-22. So that is the operating side of the budget. At the bottom of this first page is the capital outlay side. So moving over to those capital outlay funds that are for school construction, renovation, capital maintenance, furniture and equipment, and vehicles. The ask is for $35,900, which is the 2.5% that the county has programmed into their budget. So we will be in lockstep with the county as far as what their continuation funding for capital outlay is and what we are asking for. We have needs throughout the district for capital outlay, but given the current financial situation, this is what has been included in the budget for capital outlay. So the total capital outlay funds is the pie chart to the right, is $1.4 million, and you can see how that breaks out by the various categories, and there's a legend for what each of the categories mean. So that is an overview of the ask for the budget. The other side of the document, or the second page that is on board docs, includes the key budget factors that go into the budget for this year. So one of the key factors is our personnel cost, and this is representing what is the difference between in the average teacher cost from this current year, 2021, to what we're projecting for 21-22. And when we look at this average teacher cost, and remember, that's not just salary. That includes salary and supplement, but it also includes FICA, retirement, health insurance, all of the costs associated with employment. So that increase is $2,100 more for an average teacher. So that is what those additional costs, that's what's behind those additional costs that we're asking the county for. The second part of that is the number of personnel is a key factor. The budget reflects a reduction of 25 full-time positions included as part of the budget, as part of our projection for student numbers. So the last part of that document at the bottom includes the student numbers, what we currently are funded for in 2021 and what the projection is for 21-22. And one thing I would like to point out is at the bottom, you can see large, the total number of Granville County students, 8831 in 2021 and 8866 in 21-22. And why that's important, that's total Granville County students. And why that's important is because the county funding funds all of the students, both the students that are in charter schools and that are Granville County residents, as well as the students that are in Granville County Public School District. So that is important, that number is actually a little bit higher in our projection for next year, although our ADM, the district's ADM, is projected to decrease, but the total number of students is not. It's pretty consistent, actually. So that's the background of the budget, and so you also have the full document, and I am not going to go page by page. You might be excited to know that we're not going to do that this afternoon, but I will be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Ms. Day, I just want to say this one-page presentation is excellent, and I think it's a very good way to show where we are and what our challenges are financially.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for the Finance Committee's recommendation of that.
Any further questions from the board?
I'll ask one since nobody else will. We can't let Ms. Day get off. No. We know that we've had the $15 million for the facilities, you know, the roofs and all that stuff. And yet we know, and in fact, in our liaison committee meeting discussion, we know that clearly there are major needs in buildings around the county. And in fact, we heard some needs that were, you know, someone brought up at our liaison committee meeting. Do we ever, I mean, do we ever ask for more than the 1 million? And if we have, what has been the reaction from the commissioners? Bottom line, do we ever ask for more and get it?
We have asked for more.
Okay.
Yeah. I know we received the half of the activity bus one time. That one sticks out in my mind. The funding for that, for 2 years that we would have a activity bus. So I can't. I mean, it's varied or whatever, but we have definitely asked for considerable capital outlay requests in the past.
And Ms. Day, am I correct that, or maybe this is a Dr. Winborn answer, the county commissioners received our 5-year facility plan, so they know the needs, and it's broken out about what we really need to do to stay on track.
Yes, sir, that's correct. They have received a copy.
Receiving. I guess what I'm getting at is this. We obviously had a huge problem when our superintendent came, and with the mold problem and the HVAC stuff. And that wasn't new to anybody. I mean, everybody knew that there was an issue. Nobody knew it was as bad as it was. But my point is that if we don't ask in the future, if we don't ask for what we need, and then get a vote one way or the other, it's telling, and I think it just raises, we don't need to have this kind of thing happen again. Now, they came up with 15 million, but when's the next issue going to happen or something like that? I guess it's just interesting, and I think somebody along the line needs to be responsible for saying, this is what we've got, and that's it. I mean, our job by law is to tell them what we need, and it's their job to figure out a way to fund it. And so I just raised that. I mean, certainly some of us would never have even known that mold had ever been an issue. And I just would have been, and who would have thought 30 days before that happened that it was going to happen? I just think it'd be some point in time we need to make sure that they're aware that they're responsible if they don't fund it, and that's just the way it is.
And I can certainly give the board the history of what has been requested versus what we've received from various years. I recall that I believe we were in a similar situation last year. We were in lockstep with the county on what we requested. But years prior to that, I don't remember that being the case. Like, I remember us asking for a significant amount that was not funded for capital outlay, but that's my recollection.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, Board, this is brought to you as an action item tonight, as far as approving this budget to send it on to the county commissioners tomorrow morning. So what would be the pleasure of the board?
Motion to approve as presented.
All right, we have a motion by Dr. McKnight to approve the budget as presented. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a second by Ms. LeBrecq. Do we have any further discussion? All right, seeing none, if you're ready to vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, congratulations, Ms. Day, you have a budget. Mr. Terry doesn't have to change anything. All right, Board, as the superintendent said, tonight is our first report from our task force. If you remember correctly, the history from this task force presentation. Last October, when we met at Butnerston Middle School, after pausing on a decision to close an elementary school in the South, you instructed me to appoint a task force that would take up that work and review that and bring it back to you. And ever the one to try to do more than what you asked, we gave you 6 task force over a broad range of topics that are facing our district at the moment. And so tonight you will hear a report from each one of those task force. Some of them will come with recommendations for you to think about. We will not take action tonight on any of this, and at the end of it, we'll kind of talk a few next steps. And so at this point, Dr. McLean, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so very much, Chairman Richardson. We have just a short reminder of the task forces themselves, and we want to remind everyone that these were designed to help you as a board rethink, redesign, and reimagine what Granville County Public Schools could become. The task forces themselves were the Safety Task Force, which was already in play. It has been here since my arrival. That's been in play for about 3 years, and that continued. Mr. Peace is your contact on that task force, and you will hear from facilitators this evening. The work there has continued. We also have an equity task force that has been underway for the past year. The equity task force was already underway, and they're continuing to meet. Let's see if I can do this. Is that better? Okay. The task forces that began their work this spring are the Economic Development and Mayoral Task Force, and I'm so pleased. Our Economic Development Division here in Oxford and in all of our economic development regions and the mayors in each of our regions across Granville County participated. It was an absolutely wonderful partnership with each of those areas across the entire county. So you'll hear that report this evening. Dr. Houlihan and Mr. Richardson worked on that task force. Our Community Leaders Task Force was unique in that this was the one task force that did not have two-way communication, but we provided an array of information to the entire community. We opened it up and invited any and everyone to listen, learn, and hear, and if they so chose, they could send information our way. Another two-way task force was the Strategic Planning Task Force, and this task force consisted of internal and external stakeholders. They will bring recommendations this evening. The Reimagining Education Task Force with Dr. McKnight and Mrs. Williams. They co-chaired both of these. You will hear from them this evening. And then our Innovation and Forward Thinking Task Force. Dr. McKnight, Dr. Houlihan, and Mr. Richardson served there. They all have recommendations to bring this evening. Their facilitators were staff facilitators, and staff will be presenting this evening with input, if they'd like, from your board members. We've asked staff to stick with 5 minutes so that you will have an opportunity for Q&A. This evening is not designed for board work. It is designed for listening and learning, and there will be an opportunity for board work at a later date. So tonight is for listening and learning, and board work will transpire at a later date. So at this time, I believe the Innovation and Forward Thinking Task Force is up first, and we will go in the order on the screen. Innovation Task Force, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. McLean. Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Mr. Jamar Perry and I were the facilitators for this task force, and unfortunately, one of our meetings was canceled due to some of the inclement, severe weather that we had one day. So we have another meeting that is pending in a couple of weeks, but we'll be sure to get that date to the rest of the board once we get it set up. But the purpose of this task force was threefold: to serve as a catalyst for change and innovation in the district as it pertains to simply doing things differently in Granville County Public Schools. And that's from communications to calendar input and just creative ways of reaching students and families. Also was to assist the district and Board of Education to redesign district inputs and expected outcomes as the result. And lastly, to consider the Public School Forum's top 10 issues. So, with regard to the Catalyst for Change, the first purpose, at the first meeting, Mr. Perry and I led our group through several activities, and these were some of the ideas and concepts that bubbled up. They sort of fell under three main categories. The first was transforming communication and community interaction. A lot of the conversation there focused on meeting parents where they are. Instead of being a passive, sort of one-way method, we should try to take a more active role and extend out to meet their needs. Also, the second group of ideas under Catalyst for Change had to do with more meaningful opportunities for our students. There was a lot of discussion about our career and technical education programs, work-based education, more coursework and curriculum that helped improve the life skills of our students, and also more scholarship opportunities for our children. Finally, there was some excellent discussion around parental involvement and sort of some fresh ideas and fresh thinking about how to get them involved in the decision-making process of educating their children. With regard to district inputs, it focused on this topic of, how do we modify or transform what everyone focuses on now with the school report card, the state school report card. Why couldn't we come up with a local instrument? And this is something I think the board has touched on in previous years, but it does a better job of showcasing the accomplishments beyond those test scores. And so you can see there's a list of bulleted items that sort of, came up in conversation, things that the group felt were important to spotlight, to showcase, and to share. Those are all valid ways to measure strong student outcomes in our district. And there's a lot to be proud of. So that was a very interesting conversation there. The third topic was the forum's top 10 list, and that had been reserved to be discussed at our second meeting. And of course, Dr. Houlihan was poised to kind of lead that conversation and that work because of his involvement with the forum. But we're excited about that. Again, the top 10 are top 10 main issues identified as being important in public schools across the state. And so this group was going to sort of go through and tackle those and see how they measured up here in Granville County Public Schools. So we look forward to that conversation. Mr. Perry, anything you want to add?
Dr. Memoir, I think you've done a fine job of capturing our participants' ideas, and look forward to our second meeting to address the top 10 issues.
So I'd be happy to take any questions. And board members, that if you'd like to add anything?
Good job, Dr.
All right.
Wendell.
Thank you.
Good evening. The Economic and Mayoral Task Force very quickly, during our first meeting, defined 4 areas of work, and our task force decided to divide and conquer. So tonight we're going to briefly review the work of those 4 subcommittees. Good afternoon. Our first committee consisted of Dr. Stan Winborn, Harry Mills, and myself. And our first objective was to help students create a balance between work and school during these recent times and every day of school. We actually created a video where we had students share their testimonials of how they've been able to balance school and work. And then in addition to that, we created a top 10 tips that we wanted students to see. We wanted businesses to post in their employee break rooms so that all of us could be aware of how could students balance school and work. The next subcommittee consisted of Dr. Tanya Thomas, Mayor Terry Turner from Butner, and also myself. And this was a committee where we wanted to identify ways to incentivize students and to award them for performance improvement and also for attendance. We created a letter that we disseminated to businesses and to faith-based organizations where we shared with them the purpose of our committee. And then we also asked them to offer us either gift cards, items that could be raffled, academic supplies, and also monies that we could spend to provide these items to students in a way that we could, again, reward them for their efforts of improvement. You can see there on the right side is a list of some of the business partners, faith-based organizations, and individuals that have contributed to our cause. And by all means, we invite anyone who would like to continue to participate to contact myself, Dr. Tanya Thomas, or Mayor Terry Turner of Butner, and we'd be glad to come out and visit your business or your organization. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. The next committee group consisted of myself, Bill Graham, and Mayor Jackie Sargent. The principals were still having problems contacting parents, whether it was because they just couldn't get a hold of them, the numbers changed, or they sometimes get tired of hearing us call, so they choose not to answer. So we decided to come up with a list of the top 20 kids at each school that was still having issues contacting or just weren't following through. And after we got that list of kids, what we decided to do was to identify a contact person at each school that would be able to meet with volunteers that would be willing to just check in on kids, ask them how they're doing, how's the history test going, I hear you're working extra hours, do you need to cut back? Because sometimes hearing it from a different person makes a big difference. Each school, as you can see, listed the number of names that were shared with us. At that point, we went to Dr. Winborn and Kathy down at Central Office, who works with the volunteer program, and asked if we could use that program to actually vet these volunteers to make sure that our kids were going to be associated with people that were safe. All of this is going to be done through Zoom and those kinds of contacts. Nothing would be face-to-face. In your packet is a list of suggestions that we talked about for conversations, and we went to the kids and say, okay, you're struggling, what kind of questions do you want us to ask you? And the first thing they said, don't ask me how school's going. It's going, but it's not great, and I don't want anybody else to ask me that question again. And we had to explain to him that's the question we have to ask because we need to know. So they have to come up with a group of questions to ask. And also, Mayor Sargent is working with the other mayors in the county, and we have passed those flyers out. Last week, she was out in the street in front of Strong Arm, regularly giving out these flyers and saying, come and help us, we need your help. They have been sent out to the schools. The staff are calling on people that they think would be beneficial and go and willing to check in on kids just to say hello and how you're doing. So we are well on our way, hopefully, to getting some people involved with our kids to help us touch base and help them have the opportunity to express their feelings or just say, this is what I need, I don't have this, and it may even be food, So it's a variety of things going on at SEL. We hope this will be a good way to get our social workers and to get with our kids if they have a problem and see something forthcoming. The main thing is that we have an extra set of eyes on our kids so they can help the administrators know you might want to double back and check on this. Thank you.
As you have heard, our task force has been very busy. And so our last group, Celebrating Partners, this is still in the developmental phase. We will continue to make plans to recognize and celebrate the partners who support us and our commitment to excellence and achievement for all our students. Are there any questions? Once again, I would like to thank all those community partners who have sent us gift cards and coupons for a Hardee's biscuit and Our guidance counselors are working to develop some raffles and drawings and that sort of things that we can use to incentivize students for hard work and attendance.
Thank you, ladies. All right, our next one.
Absolutely. And do safety, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. McLean. So, as Dr. McLean mentioned, the Granville County Public Schools Safety Task Force has been in existence since her arrival. It was actually one of the first steps that she took upon getting here, seeing the need to really step up security and safety in our schools. Early on, the task force adopted a strategic plan with 4 major areas of focus. So whenever the group meets, they focus on each of these quadrants here: professional development, physical security, mental health, and communications. So we typically meet monthly, although that's sometimes, because of COVID recently, it hasn't been quite as frequently. The membership has tended to rotate throughout these years. However, law enforcement, the Granville County Sheriff's Department, and Creedmoor Police Department in particular have a standing presence because they are the organizations that provide our school resource officers. And of course, all of our SROs attend these meetings. Our personnel from Granville Emergency Management also play a part at each of these. They're always represented. So just recently, this is to hit the highlights of some of the recent meetings. We've been reviewing the security camera access, who has the ability to go in and see those recordings, both in real time and the archived footage. Board members, for those of you that may not know, it wasn't until about a year ago that we finally had cameras installed in every single one of our buildings. And so that was done. Pretty intense process to get through that, and a very significant amount of money, most of which was paid for by grants. We also had a discussion with the SROs and some of the administrators about making sure that the handheld radios work in our buildings. Sometimes that's an issue because of the concrete cinder block construction. So we were sort of troubleshooting, working through ideas and solutions about that. And then issues about COVID and access to buildings. There was just a lot of general conversation about that, trying to maintain building security during times of the pandemic. Under the mental health umbrella, there was a lot of discussion about our work with JCPC. That's the Juvenile Crime Prevention Committee. I believe that's the correct acronym. And they do a lot of work in this area. And so there was just a discussion about how our efforts and their efforts overlap and what ways we can partner. Also, discussions about the roles of our counselors. And of course, since we've been hiring new social workers, some conversation about that, about how that fits together with the rest of our efforts. And then there's just been a general topic about the social emotional learning for children and families during this time. Our SROs in particular, they know our families so very well. And they go on these porch visits a lot with our administrators and our counselors. And so they are a wonderful asset to our school teams, and they have a lot to offer. So just some very rich discussion about that. Finally, professional development, or what our law enforcement people call training. We've talked a lot about drills, how that's, the pandemic has impacted our ability to do those. Of course, there's summer training for our SROs, the new state See Something, Say Something anonymous reporting app that students can use. A lot of talk about that. There's the SHRIMP, which is an acronym, the School Risk Management Plan. That is a state-mandated plan that every school must have, has to stay updated. We had to go through that, make sure we're up to point on that. And then our SROs also conduct periodic walkthroughs with the school safety teams at each of their schools, just trying to add that professional law enforcement set of eyes to help us make sure our buildings are safe and secure. So I think that about covered the last meeting. We do have another one planned for tomorrow, and this one will also be held at the new Law Enforcement Center here in Oxford that just opened up. The sheriff is hosting us, so it's very nice to go and meet there. But of course, we will provide a virtual Zoom option for the members that can't make it physically. We'll be practicing the 3 W's, Dr. McLean.
All right, any questions for Dr. Winborn? All right, thank you, Dr. Winborn. Next.
All right. Equity Task Force, we have Mr. Bobe with us this evening. Mr. Bobe works with Dr. Pauletta Thompson with the Equity Task Force.
Good evening, Dr. McLean, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. I am here to go ahead and represent the Equity Task Force. We just met back in March. Seems like it wasn't that long ago. As Dr. McLean has mentioned before, this task force has been in place for over the past year. And as you can see on the screen in front of you or behind you, you can see that we have a variety of membership, a wide range of perspectives from leaders across the community, not only in education, but in faith-based organizations, nonprofit, higher education, and economic development areas. We focused on 3 purposes. Our first meeting, which took place March 31st, focused on purpose number 1, the inform and bring awareness to diversity and equity-related issues in Granville County Public Schools. As you take a look at purpose number 2 and purpose number 3, those will be our focus for our second and third upcoming meetings. Number 2 is to analyze the data. We want to take a look at the data and really identify some of the disparities, some of the gaps that are related to policy, programs, and or practices. The third point is we want to provide the feedback. We want to hear what people have to say after we've looked and analyzed that data and we've combed through it with a fine-tooth comb. We want to come back to inform the development of Granville County Public Schools Equity and Action Plan. As you can take a look at our next screen, these are our equitable policies. During our first meeting, we had a purpose, and we kind of got a little bit sidetracked a little bit. But what came out of this sidetrack was amazing. We were able to come up with policies and procedures and purposes, which was really wonderful. We got to hear what people really thought and viewed of Granville Public Schools and where we need to go to. It was really a really neat way for us not only to have that conversation, but really to define what equity looks like, sounds like, and feels like in Granville County Public Schools. If you take a look at the third and fourth bullet, and I keep on talking about data because with data, what gets measured gets done. And if we're looking at the data and then we're having these rigorous, crucial conversations about what the data tells us, then we're able to go to our next steps. But as you can see, we'll continue to focus on the data, the transparency to ensure all stakeholders can see an accurate picture of the current state. And then we're also going to focus on that measuring piece. Then we're going to talk about the equity audit that's needed to ensure that all equitable policies that can be and will be enforced in Granville County Public Schools. If you take a look at the next screen, this is where our practices come from. And our equitable practices, this is where we were able to develop from our very first meeting that we had. And I'm going to read these because these are kind of the non-negotiables. This is where we're headed. This is where we want to be as a team and as a school district. Every student deserves a safe and equitable school learning environment. Student voice should be at the center of our work. We want to focus on building stronger relationships with parents, families, and community organizations. We want to continue to have those crucial conversations needed at the leadership level to ensure equity is at the forefront of all that we do. We want to increase our efforts to hire staff that reflect the makeup of the student population they are serving. We want to provide professional development opportunities for teachers, staff, in order to learn how to provide culturally responsive instruction for students. We want to take a look at our discipline practices. We want to make sure that they're more restorative, more of a teaching moment than being punitive. We often talked about what do you do with a third grade student who doesn't know how to read? You teach them how to read. Well, what do you do with a third grade student who has difficulty behaving? You teach them how to behave. We also want to take a look and continue the current equity programming and expound upon it. We want to take this task force and make sure that it becomes as relevant as our safety task force. We also want to make sure that we continue to offer more innovative programming to meet the needs of all our students. The emphasis here is that we have to center on student voice and perspective. We need to listen to our students. We need to make sure that staff that serve our students not only look like them, but it can at least genuinely address their needs in the buildings they're serving their students. Trauma the students' experience at home cannot be exacerbated at school, so our discipline practices must become more restorative. We also want our teacher and school district leaders to make sure that the instructional practices and curricular materials are culturally relevant, responsive, and relatable for the students that they serve. All of these ideas are based off of scientific-based research. As you take a look at our next slide, as you can tell, we have a lot of work to do. We have a great committee, a great team members. We do have our second meeting, which is scheduled for April 30th, 2021. We're going to be focusing on data. We're going to be taking a look at school data. We'll be looking at individual data by schools and also by gender, as well as race, and along with a couple other subgroups and subcategories, as we want to drill down into that data to see what it's actually telling us and what we need to do a better job of. We're also going to continue to work on the development of the equity and action plan. We're going to get some notes, get some ideas from our wonderful task force members, and then we'd like to be able to bring those back and share with all of you. Any questions?
All right. Thank you,
Great.
Mr. Bo.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, our next one.
Our next one, I believe, is our Reimagine Task Force.
Good evening, everyone. I co-facilitated the Reimagine Education Task Force with Beth. We agreed that once we finish our committee meetings that I would give her the opportunity to work on the budget, which she has done beautifully. So she has handed this task over to me. Next slide, please. You can see our members of the task force is a cross-section of teachers and administrators across the district. Next slide. So there were three purposes of this task force, and the first one was to assist the board with new ideas and ideas to think differently and explore new ways that we might consider moving forward academically, socially, and emotionally. The second one was to present and share new ways to redesign and reimagine the school district to reach pupils, educators, and families pre-K through 12. And then, of course, the last one was reimagining our district strategic plan goals due to the impact of the pandemic. Next slide. So under the first purpose, you can see what our purpose was there. A couple of things that bubbled to the top, and I tried to organize these in the top ones that continue to pop up over and over again through our conversations. Flexible scheduling for teachers and students, flexible staffing, parent university and PD sessions on how to engage parents who have students who are at risk. Eliminating barriers, all barriers, physical, emotional, and cognitive barriers, implement creative hiring practices and staffing, and design mastery-based / competency-based educational practices. Next slide. Our second purpose, what bubbled to the top, continue to provide an array of learning options, market programs in schools better. What continued to come up in conversation when someone would bring up something and someone on the task force would say, well, we have that at such and such school, or we're already doing that. And what continued to come back from the parents who are on the task force, we need to talk more about the great things that we're doing in our schools. So that continued to come up over and over and over again in all of our meetings and in all of the discussions that we had. Update more programs to reflect current trends. That was talking more around our CTE offerings, around the general classroom offerings of things that are going on. Use multiple methods to increase parent communication, offer more soft skill and real life skill courses. That's something that schools now nationwide have really gotten away from, but I think that's something that's very important that we need to try to get back to, just showing students how to manage money, how to shake someone's hand, how to address someone, how to dress even when you are up to present to a group. So those soft skills, those things we don't think about that really go into educating children. Offer coding and gaming at all schools. And that, again, that goes back to just that communication piece of people not knowing what we do, because at all of our elementary schools and middle schools, we offer some low-level coding, and at our high schools, we have gaming at a couple of our high schools, as well as some coding classes. And Ms. Salisbury will talk a little more about that next month during our CTE presentation. And create programs to support successful reentry of students who were long-term suspended or placed. And I thought this one was very interesting. It came up maybe just once in the conversation, but this was actually, we had another piece that we, what to look for 5 to 7 years down the road. And this was one of the hot ones that was on there. When a student is suspended or taken out of the school and placed at an alternative setting, what are we doing to make sure that those students are successful once they get back? Next slide, please. Our last one, revisit and reimagine the district strategic plan. This goes back to something that Dr. Winborn talked about earlier, just looking at, having some sort of alternate report card. But I thought it was very interesting, the things that the task force highlighted as being something that they felt was really needed. And so I'll just give you an opportunity to just kind of look at those and just kind of digest what they have asked for on these particular slides, especially under the track and highlight areas. And I think that is my last slide. Thank you.
I have a question, if I could.
Yes, sir.
This is a critically important committee, and the biggest issue for you all to perhaps think about is that if we're going to reimagine and revisit, that doesn't mean keeping the practices and programs that we have now. Obviously, there are some that are working, but let's face it, our performance overall over the years hasn't really changed a whole lot system-wide. And if we're going to talk about reimagining to deal with academic performance, I just think we shouldn't bog down in some new program as opposed to thinking different. And let's face it, when people of like minds and like backgrounds and like whatever get together in a committee, most of the time they just do what they know. And that's to be expected. But this one's so critical, they all are. But I mean, if we do things, if we come up with efforts or initiatives based on what we know, and we know that things have not changed a whole lot over the years, I think we may just be spinning our wheels. That's my personal feeling. I know that you know this. You've heard this before. But with these subcommittees, we have a chance to really do something different. And if we do not take that chance seriously, and if we don't change things as a result of what these committees do, we'll just be like so many other committees around. We'll just do the same old, or nothing will get done. And so I just want to say, as I was looking through that, to me, there are some really great items here. There are some that are not a whole lot different than what we're doing now. And there's nothing wrong with what we're doing now in many cases, but if we don't look at what's going on and have the results to really look at it, once again, we're going to do what we've always done. And so I just want to encourage you that you've got a real chance here. The board chair and the superintendent have provided the leadership on this to get it going, and the committees and so on and so forth. Let's not just do something we've always done, and let's just not go through the steps of doing a committee piece of work. And I'm through with my harassment.
Well, thank you, Dr. Houlihan, and I was a facilitator of the committee, so this is the committee's work, and I appreciate your comments as well as the comments made by all of the committee members. Thank you.
Dr. Myrick, could you please, I wanted to see the list of the participants. I think it was like on your, yes, I'm trying to see exactly. You have people across the board. You said they were mostly teachers, right?
Teachers, administrators, and parents.
Okay, teachers, administrators, and parents?
Yes, ma'am.
What percentage parents, you think?
I think all of the committees had maybe 2 to 4 parents on there.
Oh, great. Okay.
And we tried to actively find parents that were engaging, who were wanting to bring suggestions to the table.
Right.
Not somebody we've always just drug into a committee meeting, but someone that could offer that different viewpoint across the spectrum.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
I just also, an example of doing something different, I'm looking at Dr. McLean, the Granville Academy. Now, I don't think any of us, or many of us sitting in this room, had ever dreamed of something like that. And certainly none of us had the background and experience to put it together. And that's not the be-all, end-all. It's just a great example how you can reach other kids and you can impact performance if you do things differently. And so that's just, to me, a great example. If we could do those kind of things across the system, we will be reimagining.
All right. Dr. Myrick, Ms. Day, thank you for your work on that group.
Thank you.
I believe we have one more, Mr. Chairman.
I believe so.
Our strategic task force.
Thank you, Dr. McLean. So I was one of the facilitators on this. I believe we had the pleasure of meeting 4 times, if I'm not correct. So this was a very active task force. The purposes were 5-fold. First, to serve as a think tank to offer ideas to improve fiscal responsibility. So that was in the forefront of all of the work, how to better position our school district when it comes to funding. Also to explore options and ideas designed to address strategic funding and creative planning or direction, considering the space in schools and enrollment. So again, facilities and enrollment. To develop 2 short-term and 2 long-term ideas around these topics. To analyze and make recommendations to the Board of Education on the efficient use of human capital facilities based on a variety of internal and external factors, and finally to develop innovative partnerships aimed at each student meeting his or her potential. So right away, the committee zeroed in on agreeing on a guiding principle: do what is in the best interests of children. And I think, that obviously goes without saying, but they were very deliberate in sort of arriving at that statement immediately. So tonight, what I'm going to share with you are just some of the general findings that came out of their work during these meetings. It was an incredible amount of rich discussion, a lot of different activities. Our board members did a wonderful job of leading some of those groups and helping generate really rich discussion. But I've grouped these findings into 4 areas, and this slide presentation was actually created by the committee. That was one of the final tasks that we did in our most recent meeting. So this was not just me putting pen to paper. This was their work. The first finding is that the status quo is not acceptable. The second one is that mergers or closings are required. The third is that we need to address the root causes of the loss of enrollment. And finally, we need to consider some key strategies moving forward. So, say no to the status quo. Action is required. The current trajectory is not sustainable. I think when you listen to Ms. Day's presentations, and we've all been through the capacity reports and so on and so forth, we all realize this is the case, and the committee was very adamant about this. When it comes to the second category, we need to do something. So, what is it? What is the something? So there was a lot of conversation about different scenarios. We've heard of many of these before, some of them more specific or pointed than others, but it focused around discussion of our high schools, this larger conversation about what to do with Hawley, which I think subsequently in our joint meeting with the commissioners, we've made a little more headway in this area since this presentation was created. And then revisiting what to do about elementary schools in the South. So this is not to say that other options don't exist, but this is what bubbled up to the top through this committee's work. There was also a lot of input, particularly from those who were our outside stakeholders, our community stakeholders, about urging us to take a look at what are the root causes that have led us to the decline in enrollment. They realize, of course, that charter schools, the increase in the number and the capacity of the charters in our area is the number one reason, and that's sort of a complicated issue. There are some things that perhaps we need to look at within our own organization that we can improve to try to retain or recruit more students back, and those are some of the topics right here. Improving student discipline within schools, and it was noted this could maybe be more of a historical theme that still is sort of stigmatized in our district, that a lot of progress has been made in this effort in recent years. A lot of discussion about athletics and extracurricular activities and the importance that has in making our schools attractive to families. There was a lot of discussion about that. Those are two things that we're really good at, and we need to focus on continuing to make them strong. Improving access and resources to the arts. That came up a lot in the conversations. Improving our CTE programs, career and technical education. Again, that's another theme that just sort of seemed to keep coming up in other task forces as well. And then making sure that we maintain and improve the services to our high needs or at-risk students. So again, those are just some of the potential root causes to consider. Finally, some key strategies. We need to make sure, and I think I've heard this board say this, that we're clear about the criteria we're using when we're making decisions. Is it about funding? Is it about academics? Is it about the organizational structure? We need to keep equity in mind. And we need to identify strategies to improve transparency. And this was also talked about a little bit. Maybe it's not that we aren't being transparent, but people aren't aware. Maybe there's just a knowledge gap in our efforts. So, we've been very transparent. We've made this information widely available, and we've attempted to get it out, but it's not reaching everyone that needs to know. So, and then there's a bulleted list there of some recommendations in this regard. Finally, just a general summary. This just sort of helped, provide a logic map, so to speak, of this work. As we become more efficient, then more resources will be available. And then that's going to, in turn, increase opportunities for our students. If we have fewer facilities, that's going to mean that our operations are going to improve, and we'll have a better use of our funds to improve our capital resources, right? Because we'll have fewer facilities. So both of these efforts then will improve the outcomes for our current students. But it'll also attract new enrollment, which will increase funding in the future. So it's a little bit of a cycle that feeds upon itself. The greater the efficiency, ultimately then, we'll be offering more opportunities and have more funding. So that concludes that presentation. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to
Any
you.
questions for Dr. Winborn?
Dr. Winborn, could you just address, other than, of course, board members, some of the positions or categories of community input that we did have on this task force?
Of the participants?
Yes.
On the committee? Yes, ma'am. So we had a wide variety of folks. We had some parents, we had some business leaders, we had some elected officials, we had county commissioner, we had the county manager, we had some administrators and some teachers. So it was just a very nice cross-section. Some influential members and some modest, just plain old parents.
Ms. LeBrecq?
Couple thoughts. I'm not entirely sure what task force these comments go to specifically. So, one thing is I like the leadership program that's at the at Wilton Elementary School. I think that that's something really cool that our community gives that's not terribly common. Something else that we could probably maybe think about as far as bridging some gaps in our community is offering a Spanish immersion elementary school. I don't know what that could potentially take as far as like, you know, what the teachers would need for certification and all that kind of stuff. But being that we have such a high Spanish population, and that, I mean, that language is used across the country way more than it used to be, I think that that's something that would definitely be valuable and also highly regarded in our community that we might want to consider. So I don't know what task force that goes to, but it's just something that
I would think that would probably fall in the realm of the Reimagine Education or even the Innovation Task Force. And so board members who are involved in that, you've heard that as a suggestion to take back to your groups as you continue to work after today. Good ideas. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Thank you, staff and facilitators that did that. Board members, as your role as being discussion leaders, I think we had a great, rich conversation among these groups. We've learned a lot out of them. And one thing that we're going to discuss is how we use that data. So next, one thing I'm kind of tasked the staff with was helping me put together a timeline. If you remember correctly, this work all circulated around the work we had done last year regarding our elementary schools. The studies, if you remember, had been completed. They were presented to you. And as a board, we decided in October to push the pause button on those studies from taking any action at that point. At that time, you asked me to appoint the task force to continue that work. And that main work was given to the strategic task force that reported last. A lot of that circulated around facilities and fiscal responsibility. And so that brings us back to the same challenge that we were met with back in October, and probably could consider that challenge has probably become a little more multifaceted by some of the things we have learned now. We have gained quite a bit of education and quite a bit of input from our community over the last several months in just deciding how that work will look moving forward. So before I hand out this next sheet, I need everyone to listen very carefully. Public, board members, we have not made a decision to close a school. We have not made a decision of what direction we're going. If you remember correctly, one of the steps is you can't walk into a board meeting with a closed mind. You've got to come in, you've got to hear the information presented. We have to work as a collective group to make some decisions on behalf of the students, what's best for students. And so we need to keep that as an open mind. And so one thing that I wanted us to do tonight is to kind of guide our work over the next several months. There could be lots of things that take our attention every meeting. I want to kind of establish a timeline in how we are going to tackle this big project. Obviously, you've heard you eat an elephant one bite at a time, so that's what we're going to start doing with this particular project. is we're going to kind of discuss some of the things that's in front of us. We need to make sure that as we are asking things from staff, that we also remember that they have other jobs to do besides what we're assigning out of this boardroom. And so what I'm sending around now is a proposed timeline for us to discuss today. Again, it's proposed, and what I'd like to do is to go through each point of this and kind of discuss kind of my thoughts behind it, why kind of to lay it out this way, and then we as a group discuss this. What I would like to see us tonight is to come to some kind of consensus on this timeline so that we can begin our work and stay on track and focused. This timeline will help the staff as we are developing agendas for future board meetings to make sure we're staying on focus. So if you look at the very beginning, that's tonight. We have heard an update from our strategic task force as well as the other groups. And we're discussing this timeline, and hopefully by the time we leave here this evening, we will have approved a timeline. What we need to look at and consider is we need to decide what will we do in the realm of elementary schools. If you remember, we have those 2 active studies on the table for Creedmoor and Wilton. What will we do with those studies, if anything? In the middle school realm, we said we had to come up with some decisions as far as Hawley Middle School. The idea was either to renovate or whether we would move them somewhere or what other alternatives. I believe we heard loud and clear from the people that hold the purse strings that they would not put money into renovating Hawley. So that kind of weighs very much into what our decision-making process, unless we're all going to start a bake sale. That's a whole lot of brownies. So just keep that in mind as we move forward with that. Along with our middle school and our elementary schools, obviously those moving parts, there have been suggestions that impacts our high schools as well. And if you remember the capacity studies, we definitely have room in our high schools to be able to make some moves. So as we start looking at this, we need to look at that in the realm of, as we move certain pieces, it does affect other pieces on the board. And so at our next regular board meeting, May 3rd, what I would like for you to be ready to come to is that we would come and we would discuss school consolidation options. Basically, if you were given a whiteboard for you to help decide what we would do to correct the trajectory of Granville County Public Schools right now, come with that kind of laid out. If you have been given a report by Dr. Winborn, it was a school reorganization report that walked through all the steps we have taken since way back at Joe Toller up to the current point that the new board has come on board. So along with that, you also have access to the studies that were done as far as Wilton and Creedmoor. Those are studies that were already compiled by the staff force and brought to us. What I would like to accomplish by the end of our next board meeting is that we would direct staff to either create new additional studies based off of the choices that you possibly bring, or if they need to reactivate to any of the current studies and what you may need in addition that is already reported in those studies. We've talked with the staff and they believe that they can bring us draft studies by our work session in May 17th. We would use that work session to discuss those studies, and that would be the night that we could ask for edits, additions, or any further information that you may need. If everything still stays on the timeline, we would come back on June 7th to review the final studies presented by the staff, and that would be your final opportunity to ask for any further edits for those studies, whatever they may be. We have talked about, again, even though we are making decisions that affect the entire county, we need to look at this probably on an elementary school and a secondary level because those affect each other the most. So, required by law, we have to have a public forum at that if we are considering closing a school. So if you make a decision to close a school that is in the realm of elementary schools, we will use June 14th as the time that the staff would present their final studies to the public, and we would receive comments from our constituents to satisfy the legal components. If a decision of a study was to be in the realm of a middle school or a high school, we would meet the very next day at 4:30 to do the same again, receive the final reports, and then we would receive comments from constituents to satisfy legal components. Those of you that have never been through that process, or maybe you've never watched us go through that process, what we do at that point is the staff walks through those studies. There are copies are made available to the public ahead of time as of that night as well. At that point, it is just like a public comment section during one of our regular board meetings. The public would come. We would establish some guidelines that we would follow with the help of our attorney as far as time limits, those kind of items. They would address the board. The board would not address the public. We do not give comment back during that time unless it is to ask a clarifying question. So again, once you've received that information, you take your final version of the reports, you take the information you've received as from the public forum, and then we would have a specially called board meeting on June 29th. There would be two things happening that night. The very first part is our closing out financial information that has to happen for Ms. Day. As our fiscal year closes on the 30th, that will take just a few moments. But then at that point, we would deliberate and hold decisions based on any motions that were made based on the studies. So again, this is a recommended timeline. I would like to hear your feedback, your input. Again, what we are discussing right now is just the timeline, not the different options yet. We want everybody to have some time to soak that in and come back and be ready. So let's kind of go around the table if you don't mind. We'll start with Ms. Anderson. And just, Ms. Anderson, just questions, comments about this reorganization timeline.
Well, of course, this is my first time going through this process, and I know some of you have gone through this before. So I see the timelines. I just want to just make sure that it's, the timelines will give me and others the chance to really get into these studies and think about it as we are, we'll be making some very, very life-changing situations here for a lot of folks, and I just want to make sure I'm giving it my best by being able to get into it, understand it, and everything. So that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you. Ms. Williams?
My question is, in previous things such as the closing of Joe Toller, was the timeline similar? Because it seems kind of compressed to me.
I would say this is more compressed, but we drug Joe Toller out, I think, a little bit as well. One of the reasonings for trying to make a decision by June 30th in my thoughts were the fact that we don't want to do this. We're already having schools hear rumors, which concerns me about testing time. We've been down this road during testing time. It doesn't play well for our schools. So trying to make some of these decisions and some of these conversations outside of that timeline, but also to give the staff the time that they're going to need, A, to prepare the studies, but B, when it does come time for us to make whatever decision, it gives them the time to communicate that and to also be able to make whatever changes we're directing them for the next school year. More than likely, unless you direct otherwise, which I would dare say the superintendent probably would be very hard pressed, is this would be a 22-23 decision as far as when it would take place.
Thank you.
Dr. McKnight?
I really don't have any comments. I think this is a good timeline. I appreciate that it is compressed so that we're not dragging this out. But I can't see anything that we're missing so far as each step going along with.
All right. Mr. Peace?
Yes, sir. I appreciate the timeline being compressed. We've sort of kicked this can down the road long enough. My only concern is that will the staff or the administration be able to come up with what we want if we want additional information? Of course, I've been around the whole time, so
They can get additional information from you.
yeah, you know, I don't particularly need any additional stuff, but so I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's good timeline.
So to answer that one thing is this was vetted through the staff before it was brought to you. So, all right. Ms. LeBrecq?
Only question I have is just making sure that the packet that you were talking about that we got from Dr. Winborn, that was from the joint meeting. That information is with the timeline on how that all.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Sorry. So because you had said that for us all to go back and look and do our own research and all that kind of stuff, and that's I'm cool with that. But I just wanted to make sure that the packet that I'm looking for is the one that Dr. Winborn gave out when we did the joint meeting that gave us the timeline of all of that.
He's shaking his head. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Ms. LeBrecq, that was part.
Okay.
If you recall, I think I sent that to you all electronically, and there are 2 hyperlinks.
Yes.
So there in the addenda of that document is a detailed timeline,
Okay.
which may be helpful for you to look at, and I can also provide hard copies of that.
I don't need a hard copy. I was really more just looking so that I wasn't going through like 5,000 meeting
Right.
minutes trying to find one document.
Yeah, so yes, the answer is yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
The only thing, though, that the new board members may not have are the studies, the Creedmoor and the Wilton studies. I believe we shared them, but I might be wise to do that again. To resend, and I'll be sure to do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Winborn, one thing that would help me as I look at the different schools and looking at all the pieces, if I could get a copy, PDF, if you have it, of that 5-year plan for maintenance.
Yes, ma'am. Be happy to share that with everyone. The 5-year, well, it's really what we're calling it our master facility
The
plan.
master
Yes, ma'am.
facility plan, right.
Dr. Houlihan?
Yeah, a few questions or comments. I think that the timeline, to me, whatever works out is, is fine. But the one thing one of the things that we have not done is we have not defined the parameters or the principles or what will guide us in terms of reorganization. Is a principal going to be close the Southern Elementary School? Or is it going to be that we're going to look at reorganizing the school system and facilities around a set of parameters or drivers or what? And an example of that is that a principal, all children should be in an environment conducive to learning. And the question is X school and X school the same? Or is X school and the other X school totally different? And we have that in our county. And so are we going to pick out a school and follow this timeline? Or are we going to look at, if we do something to this school, how does it impact this school? How does it impact another one? And my point in all this is, are we going to do one thing, or are we going to look at reorganization? And if we're looking at reorganization, that is a whole nother ball of wax. But I feel personally that making one decision about one school because we're in a hurry, I think would be a mistake because, as I've said before, we are going to have disruption no matter what happens. We're going to have people unhappy, as is to be expected. Look at Toller. But if we don't use this opportunity to do some significant and face the reality that face the reality that our 3 high schools are just too small. Are we going to address that now, or are we going to kick that down the road? And I feel that this board, it is our responsibility to hit this thing. We're not here to be reelected or any of that stuff. We're here to do what's right. And we know that there are situations in this county that environment-wise are not the same. So that's one way of going at it. And the other way may be one school. And I understand that it might be an issue for staff. And I understand all those things. But our obligation is to set principles about what we expect to do and then follow it. I don't have any of those answers. When I was chair, it was a mess. I mean, none of us have the answer to that. But what we learned out of Toller is doing one school at a time is not the way to do it, in my mind. And we took a long time because it was so controversial and that kind of thing. The public hearing was very unsettling because of legitimate issues that are being faced. All I say is that I'm not telling us how to do this. I'm not telling anybody how to do this. I just think that we need to set those principles, those guidelines, those parameters, and then decide how we move forward.
Can I make a suggestion along those
Yes, sir.
lines? With coming to the board with whatever scenarios you want us to study, could we come next time with what would your guiding principles be? And maybe we have to pick and pull those apart to get a guiding principle, but at least then we all come to the table of, in our mind, what are we looking at? Because I think listening to what we listened to in October, everybody had some sort of guiding principle they were following. No one was willing to say it in front of anybody for whatever reason. And so maybe now it's time to step up, man and woman up, and say, we're the ones that have to be elected to do this. These are our guiding principles. So if we add that to what schools we're going to study, here are the guiding principles that we'll look at as well. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to ask too, because kind of to the similar point, I do remember watching the Creedmoor versus Wilton meeting.
It's a good way to put it.
Kind of felt that way. It was a bit intense, actually. And I guess my question is, I feel like this is hard, obviously. I don't want everybody to go through this whole process through the elementary schools again, because you've done the research and you've done all that stuff. But I guess my question is that personally I feel more apt and prepared based on like the middle school, high school discussion, right? But with the elementary schools, are we supposed to come at this with like we're like a Creedmoor versus, are we to make a decision with Creedmoor versus Wilton, or is this do you have other suggestions? Because I feel like those two elementary schools, it's kind of like you're comparing apples to oranges, and so it's like, are we supposed to come on May 3rd with other, like a different possibility or perspective, or are we literally just coming, one of these two has to go, you're making that decision, I guess that's my question.
I don't know that we have to come with a one versus the other idea. I do know the only thing that we can find, and correct me if I'm incorrect about this, is the only vote that is guiding us at this moment is there was a vote a year ago maybe that Tar River and Mount Energy were taken off the table by this board to be considered at that particular time. Now, that vote still stands.
May I ask why that is?
The decision was made because Tar River was a newer building. Mount Energy was a larger, newer building,
Okay.
that we didn't want to close one of those schools
Okay.
based off of that. They were back into consideration, someone would have to rescind that motion, the board would have to vote on that.
Well, no, being that it's a newer building, I mean, I don't think that that's necessary. Or, I mean, yeah, I guess I just feel like there's so much, like, because I remember watching the meeting and I remember, you know, the argument for Creedmoor was that it was like a community school, you know what I mean? Like that was, everybody was there, that was their community. Wilton was the leadership program. And so to pick from one of those two, I just felt was really complicated. I guess my question is are there elementary schools that are more similar that would be easier for consolidation and like knowing, you know, where would the leadership program be best maybe put? Or, you know, is there another school that's closer in proximity to Creedmoor that they could, you know what I mean? I guess it's just a lot of information that I'm like, I don't know those answers, and I'm not comfortable in 2 weeks to be like, okay, here we go, you know?
Yeah.
So that's just.
Well, and you're not making that decision, you're making
Right.
a decision based on what you want to study.
But it still feels that way.
I know. Dr. Winborn had something to add, I think.
Mr. Chairman, I was physical location. It's isolated in the western part of our
County.
county.
Okay.
Because originally it was the southern area elementary school, so I think the board kind of ticked those three off. One, because of its geographic location, Butner STEM Elementary School, and then the two others, as you said, because of the modern facilities that they were.
Yeah. So I guess maybe to answer your question is, the way it stands right now, it's a one or the other or both of those two schools, or based off of what Dr. Houlihan's kind of thought is if we have a guiding principle and we decide to look at the county as totality, then again, we'd have to rescind that motion and go back into that, but it could be done.
Mr. Richardson,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
you're saying that if, say for instance, someone felt like I'm not saying about closing, but reorganizing how the grades were, or grade levels, or whatever, that if any of those particular schools that were removed from consideration were to be considered in any type of change, would we need to rescind the motion?
Dr. Winborn, do you have the exact wording of how that motion was?
I can look it up if you give me just a
Okay.
minute.
Give him just a moment, he'll look it up. Any other questions while he's doing that?
Yeah, how many tours can we take between now and?
How many schools
How
have you
many?
seen?
I've only seen Holly and the 3 high schools.
Yeah, that-
And, well, I mean, I have toured Tar River, but not as a member of the board. No. I have toured Tar River, but not as a member of the board. And otherwise, it's just the Holly and the 3 high schools.
Okay. Dr. Winborn?
Mr. Chairman, the document that I have pulled up is a public document, which was the one that I referenced that's hyperlinked in the addendum to that report. And this may be especially helpful for newer board members or just others who want to refresh their memory about all of the votes that have been taken. This, you can see it starts with Toller, and it deals with everything that we did there with Mary Potter, the work at JF West, also this other surplus properties, the Creedmoor Annex. So you see here that in August of 2018, the board authorized by 7-0 vote to conduct a formal study of GC Holly Middle School, Mount Energy Elementary School, and Tar River Elementary School to assess the best viable option for the reassignment of students and maximize efficiency in the southern area of the county. And then in March, the board discussed this previous action, decided against rescinding previous plan, but then did these 3 additional steps. So back down to, I think, Ms. Williams, you're focusing in on the third part of this maybe, which was to close a southern area elementary school, close Hawley Middle School, and convert an existing high school to a middle school, reassign elementary students to remaining southern elementary schools, reassign high schools to students in remaining 2 high schools, sell a southern area elementary school, and sell GC Hawley. So, if you just maybe, it probably is going to be difficult for me to talk through this publicly right now with everyone, but if you sit and read it, it shows sequentially the steps that were taken along the way and ultimately where we stand now. So, at various points, staff were directed to bring in experts. We brought in a retired engineer that worked for Wake County Public Schools and SAS, and he came in and did some consulting. We hired an architecture firm, LS3P. They did some analysis for us as well. And so that helped shape the decisions to sort of get to where we are now. But it's very complex, and it spanned over 3 years, Ms. Lebrecht. So there is, you're right, it's a lot. You need the Cliff Notes version right here to get caught up on everything.
And unfortunately, that's the predicament we find ourselves in, and the way the board rotates is that at any given point, there's new members coming on. And unfortunately, some of these school closures have been talked about for a decade or more.
And Mr. Richardson, to your point, you can see that on various occasions, previous motions were rescinded along the way. But some of them with, different vote counts.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Mr. Chair, I think it's really important that our 2 new board members have the opportunity to get whatever they need so that they feel comfortable in making. These decisions are huge. I mean, they're among the most difficult decisions. We've talked about this before, among the most difficult decisions a school board will make. And they're huge. The ramifications are huge. So I sure hope that anybody who needs additional information or visiting schools, you know what I'm saying.
Well, I'm taking notes, and I'll get with Dr. Winborn to make sure we send documents that each of you have brought up to make sure that we're getting that to the whole board for them to look at. Dr. McLean?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to make note here along that same line that the work of closure and reorganization is the work of the board, and I echo, we are more than happy to get whatever it is our board members need, even if it has been sent, because the superintendent and the executive team do not have a vote in this process. This is your work. Our role in this process is to provide you with quality information and to conduct the research necessary, or to put you in contact with those, if we are directed to do so, who can do the research on behalf of the board. Our job is to follow your directive. So we are more than happy to do whatever is necessary as you tackle, like it's been said, the most difficult work that is done by the Board of Education. So many times you will see me get up and move, and it is to make certain the public knows I am not a part of this process. Once those hard decisions are made, my job is to help mend bridges and to help people know we must still educate children very well. And we must do it with the very best we can at optimal levels, and we will seek to do that as well. So we're here to serve, Mr. Chairman.
I guess my only other request then would be, aside from being able to possibly just go and see some of these schools in person, do we have a document or something that I could get my hands on, or some of us could get our hands on, that have, like, what sets the different elementary schools apart from a learning perspective,
We actually have that document created already.
That would be great. Yeah.
It talks about the culture of the school, the programs in the school, that was given to the board just a couple months ago.
Perfect, that would be wonderful.
One thing I would add, so any other questions before I?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I've read those documents, and I will go back and reread them. I guess another question I have is in all of this process, these other schools that were taken off the table, does that preclude redrawing attendance lines to work out other situations, or can that be done?
I believe
just
the
curious.
attendance
I
lines
don't- I
can
don't
be
know.
redrawn pretty freely. All of our schools are school of choice as well,
So we really wouldn't have that. But for bus purposes,
Yeah.
yeah, but we wouldn't have to do any rescinding for that type of thing.
No, ma'am.
Okay, that's what I would do.
Any other questions?
I'm is, like you said, it's going to be something that's going to impact our students and families, and we just want to be able to, and I just want to be able to go back through those documents that you mentioned and some of the things that you mentioned as well. It's definitely something I will do, yes.
And so one thing I would tell you is that while I'm asking you to bring options next time and guiding principles, again, you're not making decisions that night on that. What you may hear is that a board member who has gone through these never thought of that we can work through, so you have that to back up. Anything, so as we send out this information to you, anything you need, we'll get you more as you start learning things that maybe you realize once you get into it, maybe you don't know something that you didn't know. You can't know what you don't know. So we'll definitely commit to doing that. There would be two things I would tell you. First will be a caution, is I said this to the ladies that toured the high schools a couple weeks ago when I was with you at Granville Central. This is a publicly streamed meeting. People are understanding that we are talking about this. It's already hit the newspapers. I read an article this morning. They were able to take what was on board docs and infer some things already. And obviously, the rumor mill is already rampant across our schools. What I would tell to you is when you do get out in the public, when you are touring schools, when you're talking with your friends at the kitchen table, please watch what you say. Please don't make promises you can't keep, because we're all one vote. The second thing is keep in mind that your voice carries weight in this district. That when we go into a school and we ask flippant questions without thinking of the ramifications, we can set an entire school ablaze as far as people being upset, not knowing or thinking we've already made decisions. Again, we have a few months to go that we have to educate strongly. We have had the toughest year known to any of us, and hopefully it'll be the last tough year, but we've had a very tough year. We want our students to finish strong. We want our educators to finish strong. And so just be very careful. The other thing is something I want to encourage you as is, unfortunately, when you start talking consolidation and closure, it does bring negative feelings. But as you saw in one of these reports, this could be the opportunity. You've heard me say over and over that this is a place of choice. I want us to be the best choice. And by some things we're going to make, we could do some really special things. Some of the things that were talked in Dr. Myrick and Ms. Day's group, the Reimagining Education, that can't be done the way we currently are staffed, the way we currently are funded, the way we are currently organized. Some of the things that came out of the strategic group and the innovation group, we cannot do any of that until we get leaner. And so what may necessarily sound a negative, it could be a really, really big positive for us. Lots of good things could come out of this if we handle it appropriately. And so as Mr. Peace led our invocation this afternoon, that if we look for children at the forefront and we ask for guidance in the way we make our steps, then hopefully we will come out of this much, much better than when we started. And I'm saying that now here in April. I want to repeat it over and over to you until the end of June and even beyond that, because no matter what decision we're going to make, we'll disappoint some people. but we could also really make some people really happy. So with that being said, is there any other comments on this? What I would like to do, if there are not, is I would really like us to take action on this. This is not necessarily an actionable item usually, but if we all come in agreement that this is the direction we're heading, at least we have a roadmap. And that's not to say we are locked into everything in here, but at least it gives the staff and ourselves a roadmap to work off of. So if that's the pleasure of the board, I would love to entertain a motion that we accept this.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Peace?
first of all, I'd like to, I do appreciate your comments. They have been beneficial. And I would make a motion that we adopt these timelines.
All right, thank you, sir. Do we hear a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Peace and a second by Dr. McKnight to accept the recommended school organization timeline for 2021. Do we have any further discussion? All right, seeing none, if you're ready to vote, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, staff, are there any questions about this that you have for us?
No, sir.
Okay. All right.
I just want to make sure Attorney Dumas is comfortable
Are you good, attorney?
with the procedure. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Guess we should have asked you before we got all excited about it.
I would have stopped you.
All right. So we're at the point of the evening. Dr. McLean, is there anything further you have?
Mr. Chairman, this evening, I would just like to thank Mrs. Shea for everything she did to get us set up tonight. Remind everyone, Office Professionals Day is coming. We've had some amazing ladies take good care of us. I'd like to thank our technology team for the work they've done to get us set up. Mr. Connor and his team here with us tonight. Thank you all so very much. And all of our task force participants who came out to personally present this evening along with our board members and staff. Everyone did a fantastic job.
Absolutely. Thank you. Board members, anything you'd like to add or anything we have missed?
Hey, I think we need to give Ms. Day a thank you. It's
Absolutely.
the first time in 15 years that I have understood the budget.
Hey, it was the pictures.
It was the picture.
Ms. Day, thank you so much. Thank you. So that will be delivered to the commissioners in the morning? All right, sounds good.
Yes.
Board members, if you see there, we have some dates for you to remember. Teacher Appreciation Week is coming up. We want to thank all of our educators. We've got some innovative ways, I think, coming. I'm excited for you to hear about those. And also maybe that's something that we can be a part of. If you see, we have our next regular scheduled board meeting for May 3rd back here at Mary Potter. There are some special deliveries going on May 5th. If you are available and interested between 8 and 10 a.m., if you'll see Dr. McLean or myself, we'll let you in on what's going on there. And then we will have our work session and then our June meeting. And I think we are really attempting this year, we're going to get out of here before my wife has dinner ready. But B, we are trying to give you July off if it is all possible. No guarantees yet, but we're trying. So, all right.
You've been able to work miracles. You're working.
All right. If there's nothing further, we didn't. Dr.
Mr.
Wimborne.
Chairman, may I share one additional date to remember? And I'm sorry, Dr. McLean, but this Wednesday is the second vaccination round for our students age 16 and older. And I want to thank those board members who've already signed up to volunteer. So thank you all so much. And even if you can only swing by for a little bit, we'd love to see you there. A lot of our staff have stepped up to help out with that. And it'll be at Granville Health Systems this Wednesday from 4 to 9 p.m.
Absolutely.
Hopefully it won't be raining this time.
That was more than rain last time.
Wow.
Again, thank y'all for all the work you've done in that vaccination realm. I've heard from some other people involved in schoolwork across the state, and I think it's been top-notch what we've tried to do for educators. Some other districts have just told them to go find it, which that's what they could do at the time. But we are glad that our health system, our nurses, the staff here has pulled that off. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, we have